Hey everybody, it is Richard Harris and Scott Leese, and we are back again for another episode of the Surf and Sales podcast. I am super excited for a couple of reasons. One, we have Roque Versace with us, and that's R-O-Q-U-E for all of those people who love to call him Roque. It's actually Roque. The other, and we, of course, Scott's here with me, and the part that I'm most excited about, I don't even know if Roque knows this. I tease Scott with it. This is the first time I've ever known a person like me to be able to talk to two people who both hired and fired me.
Oh, stop.
That's the catch-all. So, Roque,
and remain cordial.
And remain cordial, right? No, it's actually a true story. Both those instances, I owe a lot to Scott and Roque. Scott gave me a shot back in 2008. When the economy was turning and I had to take a major step down and a step back and had to sort of rebuild my career. And that got me into sort of startup phase. That company went from 0 to like 7 million ARR in about 9 months. And we went back down to 0 ARR in another 4 months. So it was a fascinating story. Fast forward after that, a couple of other gigs along the way. And I met Roque at Mashery, and it's interesting because I remember our interview too, Roque, which we'll probably get into, but Roque took a shot on me, and I humbly and gratefully am appreciative of that because it was my first true SaaS experience in my mind. And then, that company grew and eventually was going to get bought by Intel. They didn't need me. I always sort of say I was line, 48 on a 27-line spreadsheet in terms of people they were going to keep. They didn't need another sales ops person, but Mashery and Roque hugged me out the door, made sure my family had some runway and not have to worry too much, which ironically is how I sort of became a consultant. So I owe a lot to Roque as well. So it's fun to have you both here. I'm not gonna pin you up against the wall and ask you deep personal questions. But Roque, thanks for joining the show today.
Well, thank you. And I remember your post Mashery period when you would come in, we'd meet every few months or so, and you'd show me your dashboard, and you killed it. So You did a lot better after you left Mashery. So
I agree. But I think you gave me a huge foundation, which I appreciate. So with that being said, let's dive into it. Roque is officially the CRO at Troops.ai. While we're not here to pitch people, Roque, we do like people to understand where your frame of reference is. What is Troops? What does it help solve? What problem does it solve?
Sure. So we like to say that Troops makes business software more human, right? And what do I mean by that, right? Troops, we in a nutshell, we support continuous productivity by surfacing workflows and tasks and alerts from Salesforce and let people take direct action from them within Slack. And so, I like to say to people, I used Salesforce.com last century. And I actually did. Before I joined Salesforce, I was at Broadvision, and we were at the time their biggest customer. And it was a big, it was just it's a total change, right? But back then it was just Salesforce automation. And now it's, if you look at analysts and things, they call Salesforce infrastructure. They don't call it CRM really even anymore. And so it's become really hard for the end user to use. And you can look at tools like Gainsight or Outreach and SalesLoft. Well, why do they exist? They exist because Salesforce is this system of record, but BDRs don't want to use it. CSMs don't want to use it, but nobody's really helped SEs, sales engineers, or reps. And so that's what we're doing. And we're trying to do it in a, kind of like a really quiet way, as in we live in Slack, so you don't have to go learn another system. You don't have to take yourself out of the flow and go into another system and log on to get your work done. You can do it right from Slack. So that's kind of it. And these workflows all fall under kind of different categories, like commit. You get a workflow to make sure you update your forecast. Coaching, you update your med pick, and your manager gets an alert and can coach on your impact and the metrics that you gained and the champion notes that you've gotten. Or a celebrate, you've won a deal, or you've set a meeting, or the meeting's happened, and so you send an alert into a channel so that you can celebrate. Or connection, when somebody does something in one part of the organization, other people often need to know. So if you're in finance and you kicking off that a rep thought was closed out because you didn't have the right paperwork, an alert going to the rep in Slack in real time telling them, hey, you need to go back, get the purchase order, or else you're not going to get paid. Those kinds of connective fibers are what we're trying to talk about in terms of helping everybody get smoothed along the way and make it more human to use the software and make it more fun and make it more productive.
Cool. Well, thank you. Let's dive into who's Roque, right? Roque grew up in Baltimore, if I remember correctly, right?
I did. I was actually born in DC, and my parents, as they went from being college students to working their way up, moved from Southeast DC, where Sugar Ray Leonard grew up, to Baltimore to live with my grandmother for a couple of years, and then into the burbs of Columbia and Ellicott City.
Got it. And sort of fast forwarding from there, you obviously I know that you served in the first Iraq War, and we appreciate that service. But did you go from high school to the military, or did you go to college first? Like, how did that come about just for you?
Yeah, I went ROTC, and I was a lazy sophomore in college, and they kept sending me ROTC scholarship stuff, and I kept throwing it away. And finally, they sent it to my parents. and my dad gave me like 4 pieces. He wasn't a big talker, but there were like 4 things that he told me over my life that I always remembered. One was to save in an IRA. He's like, just put your money away in an IRA right away before you even see it, and start to save for your retirement. 2, he said, major in whatever you want, but do me a favor and just minor in computers, because if you do, you'll never have to worry about a job. And this was in 1980.
What year was that?
1985.
Wow. He was already telling you to learn computers.
Yeah, and it was really great. I mean, you look at this, where we are now with everybody, and hey, I feel left behind. I'm like, if everybody had my dad, they would not have been left behind. And so, and then the third, there were a couple others, but the third one was he bribed me, and he flat out said, I'll buy you a Bronco too if you take this scholarship, because it'll save us 30 grand and the car cost me 14. So to be really honest, that's what set me over the edge and made me do it. But he was right. I needed it. I remember taking my first PT test. I think I did 25 push-ups and could barely finish the 2-mile run. I'd just become lazy college kid. And then by the time I got out of the airborne, I was part of the 82nd Airborne, could do 100 push-ups and that kind of thing. It was that constant, and it wasn't like overnight. It was years of raised expectations, from basic training to officer training to being in an airborne unit to being in an airborne unit where you're supposed to be the best. And that was a great piece of advice. So that's what happened. I went to college, got my degree, and then went out and joined the Army as a lieutenant and got to serve in Italy.
And you're, if I remember correctly, your family has been in the military for a while. It sort of runs in the Versace family, right?
Right. Grandfather and uncle were West Pointers. My father was enlisted Special Forces. My uncle, he was captured in Vietnam and held captive for 2.5 years and then executed, and was in 2002 posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. So we went to the White House. George Bush gave my dad the Medal of Honor. That picture of George Bush and my dad sits in the George Bush Library in Dallas. I think it's in Dallas. And so if you Google my name, chances are you're going to get 500 responses of my stories about my uncle, who passed away over 50 years ago and then finally buried way deep. I think I am.
Right.
Yeah, it was a foundational story for the family, right? There were a lot of brave soldiers,
right?
Obviously in Vietnam and all these other wars, but my uncle, if you could call it this, had the fortune of having his story kind of memorialized, because another man named Nick Rowe was captured along with my father, and he escaped after 5.5 years and wrote a book called 5 Years to Freedom. And that book chronicled my uncle and his story. And, that was really kind of a blessing. And then Nick Rowe came back, and in 1989, he was assassinated in the Philippines. And so he lives 5 years in Vietnam and then comes back and is assassinated. And in 2002, during the Medal of Honor, my father had invited his widow and her 2 sons, and her 2 sons and I met, and we hung out and we played basketball together. And his son was 13 years old, his younger one, and he had never met his father. And so, yeah, it's that's that kind of like deep stuff that that really kind of form a family. And so my sons are named Rocky and Nick after those 2.
I knew about Rocky. I didn't know that's where Nick's
Yeah,
So
that's what Nick's. That's who Nick's named after.
and do your kids have any desire to go into the military? And do you care? Do you?
Well, my older one certainly doesn't, and my younger one just recently has been saying that he wants to be a Navy SEAL, and I'm like, where did this come from? And so
It's obviously in front of them.
yeah, and no. My wife would kill me if he joined the military. So, but I have to be really careful. I don't want to impact his dreams, but I want to make him aware of the reality of what that would entail.
Right.
And you might have to kill someone. That's not a light thing to think about, right? It's impactful. And just as a sidebar, in college, I took this death and dying class and had to write a paper, and I wrote a paper on suicide in the military. And in 1989, I drove all the way down to the Library of Congress, and I could find 4 pages on it. And now they're saying that 6,000 soldiers a year take their lives, right? And so you think back, how many former veterans drank themselves to death, or just went into a shell and were never themselves. So it's not just the soldiers you lose there, but it's the hearts and minds that you lose when they come back too. So it's a really deep and important decision to make, because that'll change your life.
Yeah. How did, just out of curiosity, and I know we'll get into sort of, software sales and stuff, but I think this is really fascinating. And a lot of times we don't get to have these conversations with people. How was your transition back to civilian life?
My transition back was easy-ish. I watched my soldiers, though, who were not college grads, come back and try to find jobs and figure out what their careers were. But I will say that, I waited tables for a year because I didn't time it very well. And you'd stand there and some guy would be in there with his date, and then you'd talk to him for 5 minutes. He's like, "What are you doing waiting tables?" And you're like, "I'm just not going to go into it." Right. And then I remember I met a woman, and I met her parents, not my wife. And they're like, and this was when I moved out to Monterey for the summer just to wait tables. They're like, "What are you doing dating a waiter?" And I'm like, I just got done serving our country, and I'm a veteran, and that's how you're judging me. So that, from that perspective, there was a lot of swallowing your pride. And I think that's actually a theme that I think that we should talk about all day today. Not necessarily swallowing your pride, but understanding that not everything is a straight up trajectory in your career. And I had that a lot. Like, so when I got out of the military, you're leading a bunch of men. You have a lot of responsibility. I had my own Hummer and driver at 23. And, I still don't have a driver, right? I'm 50 now, 52. So
spend the rest of your career trying to get to a place where you do have a driver.
Yeah, and you're really doing something that you feel is pretty noble as a soldier. And so you take a step back. And I went into grad school, and for me, getting an MBA was really like getting a BA, because I mentioned I studied computers, so I didn't know a thing about business. My father was a professor, my mom was a nurse. I didn't know anything about business. So for me, an MBA was really just a BA in business. And then I went to Accenture, and I went to Accenture at the same level as a college graduate. And it was 1994, and I thought people would want to hire for leadership, but people wanted to hire for what you've done before you went into grad school. So I started down again in Accenture, and got 4 years, and I up until just a little while ago, literally in this year, when I realized that Troops is really about change management and process change and understanding the as-is state and the to-be state, that I realized it was these consulting years that I did at Accenture that actually helped me so much, those 4 years. And I used to think that I'd never done the BDR role. I used to think I kind of cheated out of that because I didn't do that 1 year of cold calling. But what I did do is 3 years in the military, learning that you never call in sick because they make it miserable for you if you do call in sick. And the next 4 years at Accenture, learning how to uncover pain and solve it. And so really the idiot that I am, I'm thinking, oh, gee, I got out of a year being a BDR, but I put in 7 other years to learn a lot of really important stuff that was, really frontline, not management level work.
Let's talk. So I know you came out of that and you went from Accenture to Broadvision, right? If I remember correctly. And then Broadvision, you went to Salesforce, right? And Salesforce, this is, as we were talking earlier, literally almost last century. In fact, we could say, 2 decades ago, right?
Yeah.
And how early were you at Salesforce? Like, were you employee number 100? Like, were you?
You got to tell us the story of how you got hired and
yeah, that too.
What the interview was like.
Okay, so I was around 220 or so. I went to Broadvision, and our stock went from $1 to 90 to $1 during the dot-com boom and bust. And so, and I was a VP at the end at Broadvision, which was absurd, absolutely absurd, right? And that was kind of the dot-com bubble, inflated titles all the way across, and there I was. And a guy named Jim Thanos, who's my mentor to this day, I know all of his kids, his son-in-law. He is an amazing guy, and he was an amazing leader. And Benioff and he were talking about him becoming the head of sales at Broadvision, at Salesforce. I don't know how far it got, and they eventually hired Jim Steele, which was a great move. But they got to know each other really well, and Thanos gave Benioff 4 people from Broadvision that he really liked, and 2 of them were over in Europe, and there was me and Roger Goulart here. And so I went and met with Marc Benioff in 2002 in May, and literally after hellos, the first thing he said to me was, "Our top rep made $600,000 last year."
I love that.
And I'm like, and I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but now I've never had a CEO say that to me since, and I've talked to hundreds, right? And so people, I don't know, really get how sales and business and operationally focused Benioff was. And so then I met with Michael Bash, who became my first manager. And within 5 minutes of the interview, he says, "I don't know why we're spending time talking, because Marc already said to hire you." And it was largely off of, I met with Marc for 5 minutes, so I didn't say anything. It was all off of Jim Thanos' recommendation. And so they hired me, and Marc just made a heck of a lot of fast decisions, I would suppose, because in that summer of 2002, he built out the field sales team, and a couple hundred people were brought in, doubling the size of the company pretty quick. One thing I'll say about Marc also is that I was just having lunch with Jim Thanos a few months ago, and he said, "You know, months after you and Drew and Roger and Ariel started at Salesforce, I got a letter from Marc with 10,000 shares of Salesforce saying, 'You saved me a heck of a lot of recruiting fees, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.'" I mean, he hired a couple hundred people, and he remembered to do that. Jim was blown away. And so
I'm blown away.
You know, when you think about that stuff, it's like,
I'm blown away that a CEO actually recognized that a head of sales was saving them recruiting fees and did something.
It's not even the head of sales, though. This guy wasn't even an employee.
No, he wasn't. He was outside the company. It was really remarkable. Wow. It's like these little things that you piece together. Yeah, you're like, it's not an accident that Salesforce is Salesforce, right? I know everybody likes to
rag on. What was that like, though? What was like? Was it, you know?
By the way, that's $1.75 million worth of.
Yeah, I don't think he held on to it. But I don't want to bring that up to him.
Yeah, it's like the guy who sold. It's like the third guy at Apple who sold his shares for like $500, right? We've heard that story. What was it like in those early days of Salesforce? Was it an easy sell? Was it a tough sell? I mean, was there even a process? And I know you're a process guy. You know, what was that like as a sales rep back then?
So I think this is a really interesting one, because I've been dealing with this lately a lot, which is, it was pretty, when I got there, it was around 20 million. And when I left in 2008, it was on the track to get to $1 billion. And I look back then, and we had just rolled out Enterprise Edition the spring of 2002, which was really what led us into the path of being able to work with big companies, because you had that API. And so it was hard. And I came in first in the account management team. And I think this is a good lesson for anybody in business. And I tell this to all the people that come in to companies I work with, which is, there were people at Salesforce like Brian Millham and Rob Acker and Brian Neefsey who were, you know, frontline managers, and they would come and say to Benioff, "Hey, we're not paying attention to our install base. There's a lot of money we could make in our install base. Give me 10 people and I'll drive $10 million in ARR." And so it was that, and that was what Brian Millen did, and he got the account management team, and I joined as an enterprise account manager and grew accounts, right? And so, but that is a really important lesson, because it's like nobody handed Brian that, and he didn't just say, "Oh, I think we can do it. Give me people and stop." He said, "Give me people, and I will make you money." Rob Acker did the same thing after we started getting big. He goes, "We've taken our eye off the SMB again. Give me 10 people and I'll make $10 million," and grows that team. And now Rob Acker is the CEO of Salesforce.org. Brian Millen is president of Salesforce for years now. And then Brian Neefsey went in years later and said he had gotten a presentation from one of the partners in the financial services industry and saw how they had configured Salesforce. And he came back to the team and said, "We have no idea how to sell to financial services. We need to partner. And if you give me a team of 10 people, we'll make $10 million. And then he built that financial services branch in corporate sales. So in the early days, it wasn't easy. You'd go into places and and buyers would almost Honeywell, American Express. American Express, they had like 4 levels of security. You were only allowed to store level 1 data in Salesforce because we didn't have the security. We would almost get this virtual pat on the head. "Yeah, we're going to use you now when the economy's low, but as soon as it comes back, we're going with Siebel." Like, okay, well, we'll live to fight that day. So it was not easy. I think that a lot of things did go in our favor. I think the fact that the economy crashed meant that people couldn't buy Siebel and Oracle. That helped.
And this is 2003 economy crashing, not 2008.
No, this is the 2000. This is the .com boom.
The .com. Okay, I just want to put some perspective for people.
Yeah, budgets all got pulled away. It was bad. I mean, it was 2000, 2002. 2002 was really bad economy, and so people couldn't buy the big software. So Salesforce could get in there, which was really helpful. The competitors like Upshot I remember walking through the airport and seeing dashboards on the wall and the integration with Outlook, and we would lose deals on that. But Upshot then got bought by Siebel and ruined. And then Upshot was built on NT, which at the time big companies didn't think was secure, so you could beat them there. You just figured out ways to win, but it never felt easy. And we'd lose a lot to Siebel. I had the Pacific Northwest, so we would lose to Microsoft a bit. And after I left Salesforce in 2008, a guy named Brett Gilbert would call me every 6 to 9 months or so and say, "Hey, remember this account? We just won them back." Right? All these ones that we lost eventually came back. So it definitely got easier, but it wasn't easy.
There's a lot of interesting takeaways from that, but one thing that stood out to me was you said you were an enterprise account manager, and today you're a CRO. I think a lot of people, a lot of listeners out there, myself included, would call that an unconventional road to CRO. Like, I'm thinking about places where I've worked and people who are in, account management roles, customer success kind of roles. I don't think that they generally are thinking of their career path as one towards a CRO type place. So how have you navigated that? How did that happen?
So enterprise account exec install base, it's a sales role at Salesforce. It was, right? You had a 600K new business ACV number and a 2 million renewal number, and you had 30 accounts. So it was sales. And I think that I don't think anybody's going to follow my career path. It's kind of random. I never have had really an idea of at 25, I know what I'm going to be doing at 35 or 45. It's kind of a meandering path that I don't think anybody would follow. I mean, I've gone from soldier to consultant to product manager, owning a product line, to account manager, to a sales guy. And I think that what helps with that is, and I think that in my position now, one of the main things is helping people understand what everybody else faces. Like if somebody in sales is doing something and I can say, "Hey, that's okay, but if you don't do it in this way, when we hand it over to professional services, they're kind of going to be screwed. Or if we hand it over to CSMs, they're kind of going to be screwed. Or this is why this is important to marketing, or this is why this is important to the product team," right? Just having that broad breadth of experiences to understand, you kind of like seek first to understand, walk in another man's shoes or whatever. That was really the most helpful part.
I think it's important that people understand and hear that, it hasn't been a straight line,
No, and I went back down, right? So from from grad school, starting over at the bottom again, from being a VP and at Broad Vision to being an individual contributor at Salesforce. So, and look, I'm a CRO at a Series A startup, right? I'm not a CRO at Salesforce, so it's a different level job. It's not like, I mean, this isn't. It's a hard job, but it's not incredible. It's not like neuroscience. I'm not a neurosurgeon. It's just CRO, and you have a breadth of experience, and you hope you can help your team win and grow. So I don't think we should overblow the role that I have today. It's a good role. I love it. It's fun.
What have you found that you love again about the Series A size company, the early stage, and the building something from scratch versus things that you love at such a huge company like Salesforce and Broad Vision and these kind of places?
I think there's challenges in sales regardless of the company you're at, and there are different kinds of challenges, right? The Series A, the challenge is usually people don't know who you are, right? And you can get yourself in a twisted up in knots over, gee, if I just sold Google, I'd always be able to get that meeting and be able to go in and people would trust us right away. And, or if I was at Salesforce or SAP, I could always get that meeting. But those people that are in sales in those roles, they're dealing with shrinking territories and maybe not as much control over their destiny. I mean, if you're at Salesforce and you're the top strategic guy, you got maybe one account and hopefully that account's doing well. So I think there's challenges no matter where you go. And it just depends on what kind of challenge you like. And I like the challenge I like being the underdog. I like being the little guy. I like getting out there in front of people and showing them like new stuff, like Broad Vision, getting people on the internet. Believe it or not, in 1998, our meetings were, our customers aren't going to trust the internet with their credit card. And we would say, people said that about ATM machines. And now look, you're out at 2:30 in the morning in New York City on a street corner taking money out. So
believe it.
Because only good stuff happens at 2:30 in the morning when you take out cash.
That's true, but you see the point. It was like, and then in Salesforce, it was, there's one code base. This is the democratization of software. Anybody can now use it. And that was a different thing, putting your stuff in the cloud. And then all these startups I've been at, Mashery, was, hey, APIs. If you have APIs, you can open up your business to move so much faster. Those were all newer ideas. And it was fun. And it's fun, and I like it. And so what we're doing now is newer and fun. And I like that challenge more than feeling like I don't have as much control over my destiny at a bigger company. But that's just me.
Let's dive in a little bit into your hiring strategy, right? Because I met you at Mashery, and there were maybe 6 or 7 salespeople and a couple of SDRs. This was 2011, 2012, and it was before, right before predictable revenue came out. I know you work with Aaron at Salesforce, but that's for another discussion. When you are hiring today, right? Whether you're hiring for, well, let's sort of take each of the roles, right? As a BDR and SDR, what are you looking to hire for? What are you teaching your managers to look for to hire for if you have a BDR manager?
We are hiring BDRs. I don't think there's going to be anything new. We just hired a bunch, and I think they're great. What I loved about Troops is they're a New York company, and they're doers. Like, they're hard workers. This is not a startup where you get lunch and breakfast and dinner brought in. It's a real kind of like an old school company. And so the people we attract tend to be people who really want to learn and get good and work hard. And so you look for that work ethic. We do like hiring people that've got a good pedigree. A couple of our recent hires, Michigan, USC, they don't have to come from a great school, but that does mean something. If you worked really hard in high school and you got into a good school, and you worked really hard in a good school and you got out, I wouldn't say that that's a rule. There's also a recruiter in New York now who hires who represents only BDRs that are athletes from top 30 schools. So we have a BDR from Princeton, and the guy's killer. He was a football player too. And so there is something to be said for that kind of work effort, right? But we also look at the personal stories, and I won't go into them, but each of those BDRs that we hired had their own personal story of different types of adversity and things like that they overcame. So certainly, how do you get back? Tell me when you got knocked down and how'd you get back up? Because you're going to get, I actually love this story, right? So I sold to this guy back in 2003 or 4 at Trimble, and it was before GPSs were, before smartphones. And so they sold him a device at GPS on vehicles. And so he would go to electricians, plumbers, window repair, people who had, 4 to 8 fleet of trucks. And he'd say, look, if you put these on your car or on your trucks, we'll be able to route your people to the next call in the most efficient way. And we'll let you know if they're out on Ocean Beach smoking marijuana for 4 hours when they're supposed to be on the job, that kind of thing, right? He hired all 1099 reps, and he wrote this book called Ready, Set, Sell. And in it, he talks about Pareto. And this guy, Don Mastrangelo, he was like so psycho on the 80-20. He'd be like, I can hire 5 managers, only one's going to work out. I'll hire 5 reps, only one's going to work out. And so he wanted Salesforce because he wanted to see activity level right away. He's like, you're going to get, and he's like, in Pareto and sales, he's like, you're going to get 80 no's for every 20 yeses. And those 20 yeses, only 20 of those are going to be hot and ready to go. 20% of those will be hot and ready to go. So he would actually have a spreadsheet, this big paper with 100 squares, 96 no's and 4 yeses. And he would use that as a training mindset for his people and say, you got to get 96 no's to get 4 yeses. And if you get those 96 no's in a day, obviously you're not, that's too fast, but if you get that in a day versus a quarter, you're going to make a hell of a lot more money. And so he wanted to see the DNA. He wanted to see that the people that he hired would within a week or two show that velocity to get through those 96 no's, not get beaten down, to get to those 4 yeses. And I've always remembered him in terms of hiring, in terms of I need people who understand that a no is just one no closer to a yes, and it doesn't demoralize you.
That's great. The thing I took out of that story though is that, you hired me coming out of, from the University of Arizona. So seeing U of A and Michigan.
I've learned. It's been a decade, Richard. I've learned.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to get hired.
So what about, as you think about it from that DNA perspective, I appreciate that. What do you look for when you're looking for an AE? And maybe even to clarify a little bit, at Troops, what's your average, if you're allowed to say, what's your sales cycle like? What's your ARR, that kind of stuff, so people get a context of what the DNA you're hiring for based on your deal size?
Well, the DNA that we're looking for is still to be determined. We're still young and we're still trying things out. But one of the things that I think is really important is when I initially got there, I think it's an evangelical sale, but now I actually don't believe that it's an evangelical sale. A little bit, like people are just starting to learn best practices in Slack, and we live in Slack. And so our guys have 5 years of working with Slack. They know Slack better than any company out there, really. We integrate with it, we use it. And so we have a lot of expertise in terms of how do you get the best out of Slack. So from that perspective, it's evangelical, but the main thing is that it's process reengineering. And that's, getting in and figuring out what's going on with your business today. Like, I wrote the pain funnel, Richard, where you go in and you have to figure out, how do we increase your productivity? How do we help you get better data visibility? How do we give your reps more time to sell? And that's all about being able to uncover what you're doing today, why it's not sustainable, and mapping out what the future looks like. So that's really more of a process background. And so I am looking for more senior people who understand that need to talk to a lot of different people and figure out where you're at today and where you need to be. And the jury's still out on how that's going to work. Ask me in a year or two, right?
Are you finding that the motivation and the goals of the folks that you're interviewing and trying to hire now has changed and evolved compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago? I'm just thinking, I love the story of Marc Benioff just saying, hey, my number one rep made $600,000. However, in today's kind of environment, I'm also picturing a world where people could potentially be put off by that, especially younger people who maybe care about things more than just the almighty dollar. So I'm wondering, if you're finding that, like I've found it, at least, like the goals and motivations of people and what they want out of the role are a little different now than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Do you feel like that's the case for you as well?
You know, I have listened to one of your previous podcasts where you guys went on this for a long time. I'm
dragging you into it now.
I'm not going to be as actually, you know, I've been thinking about this since '94 because I went into Accenture much older, you know, 4 or 5 years older than most of the other people. And even back then, there were people that I looked at that were like, really came to work to want to work, and some that didn't. And I think that's still true today. And so again, we look for people that want to work and grow their career. And if you want more meaning, I mean, we're selling software, right? I mean, we're not the ACLU, we're not, you know, the Gates Foundation reducing infant mortality by 50%, which is
we certainly try to take ourselves that seriously.
But I don't. And so I take the impression, the point of view that if I'm interviewing somebody, it's because they want to go down a road of getting better, and they want to grow themselves and as much as we can. I mean, you know, our whole point is we want to make work more human. So we do have an aspect where we want to make work better, and we want to make it more fun, and we want to make it more productive so people can be more successful. So that is our vision, is make work more human. But we also, I want people.
Are you just showing up in the interview and saying, hey, my number one rep at Troops makes blank? Makes X?
Well, no, not yet. They're not at 600 grand yet, but I'd love to. That's actually
where they're at, though. 100 grand, 200 grand.
That's one of the biggest things about hiring at a Series A startup is that you can't really look back on that and say that with, even if you only have one rep.
You can't at all. Look, I spent my whole career virtually in the environment of seed stage to Series C, right? And you know, like it or not, like you're selling a dream. You're selling the dream of like, I believe this is what you're going to be able to earn now in year 1. I believe this is where we're going to be able to take you in year 2 and year 3, et cetera.
I would say that when it comes to hiring reps at a Series A startup, a lot of time it's, and I love this DNA, and I have it, and I never lost it, which is I always feel like I have something to prove. And whether it's, I was just at a failed startup before this one, and I was at a startup that didn't work out for me before Mashery, and I had really had something to prove. And I find that when I find people like that actually have the right DNA, they have that, whether it's a chip or it's on their shoulder, or whether it's a desire, that they have something to prove. I like that a lot.
Right. I do too. I love the chip on the shoulder.
Right. I mean, you can't let it get unhealthy, right? But I do think that's what you need at a startup. The person who's like, I'm going to get a huge territory and I'm going to make it rain, right? Because I'm in control. Like if you're an enterprise rep at Troops, you're getting a quarter of the country, right? And you know, that's a lot. That's a lot of dirt. And if you have the right DNA and you have that right motivation, like the talent code, right? How do you? It's desire, expert coaching, it's ignition, expert coaching, and deep practice, right? And so if I can find the people with that desire, that ignition, and I can give them the best coaching I can, and they can practice their craft really well through a good process, then they should become great at their craft, right? And that's kind of what you have to look for, because you can't, you know, the guys that are making 500 or 600K at Salesforce year in and year out, you're not going to pull them out.
No, you don't want them at the very beginning, most likely as well. I mean, you know, First Round Capital just released like their state of startups, you know, kind of report, and you know, making an impact, solve a problem that makes a difference, important mission, great team to work with, strong culture. Like these are the things that you know, I think early stage salespeople are looking for. You know?
I love the First Round Capital guys. Anything they say, I think is really worth listening to.
Yep. Were they with Mashery when? Yeah, they were.
That was one of the best parts about leaving Salesforce, is getting into the startup world and getting this whole nother awareness of people. So Josh Koppelman wrote the first check to Mashery to Oren after Oren sketched out what Mashery was. And so
on a cocktail napkin, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and he was on the board for the first couple of years, which was, I mean, just getting to know Josh Kaufman is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
That dude's legit. And Fred Wilson, you know, Oren knew him. And so just meeting a lot of these people who understand the startup world so well. That's another thing. If you want to, that's an important one, actually. I'm glad you brought that up, Scott, because a lot of people join a startup because they want to be an entrepreneur. And a lot of people have come to Troops because they want to start their own company someday. And our CEO, Dan, has done it before a couple times. And when you get into a Series A startup, you're closer to understanding what that takes. And you get to rub elbows with the Union Square Ventures and the first round capitals of the world and really hear about how people do it. And that's a big plus for a lot of people, is that, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, and being at a good startup with good connections is a great way to get there.
I think a lot of salespeople are more entrepreneurial than they realize. You know, as a salesperson, you're running your own business, right? And I'm hoping that, you know, in the next wave, there's more entrepreneurs that have a direct sales background, and it's not, you know, so seemingly dominated by finance and private equity and engineer and product kind of folks.
Yeah.
I've got two more questions for you. The first one, Rock, is, you know, I made this post on LinkedIn about interviewing the other day. and you know, I was sort of first of all, everybody, I think people know I sort of like to take an attitude about things, because otherwise LinkedIn gets boring. But the premise of it was that, you know, companies aren't interviewing you, you're interviewing the company. Other thoughts that were in there was that, you know, if companies are hiring, in some ways they're desperate for support, because something's not getting done until they fill that spot, right? And you were kind enough to send me a really nice note that says, you know, you didn't necessarily agree with a lot of those thoughts, right? So, and one of the things you brought up was, well, wait a minute, what if this person has, you know, 6 failed startup attempts, or they've had 6 jobs in 4 years, and, you know, you sort of see that from your perspective, you might see that as a red flag. From my perspective, and I think I'll speak for Scott, is like, well, this is the person who's hungry. You know, they just had some shitty leadership in some cases, right? I'd love to just sort of get more of your opinion around those kinds of things. Are those really red flags for you? In today's world, particularly, at least in the startup world, and I'm in the Bay Area, you know, seeing somebody jump every 9 months, it's just sort of the norm at this point. And it's up to me, if I hire that person, to make them not want to leave after 9 months. So,
well,
what are the things you look for in that resume review as you're looking at people, just to give people a different?
I'm going to parse this, because it's 2 things that you asked. One is that I don't think it's healthy to go into any interview thinking that, you know, you've got hand, like in the George Costanza thing. I don't think that's healthy. And going in and thinking, oh, I'm interviewing you, that is not going to come off very well. And I think also in this,
it worked when you hired me.
I don't think you came off that way. I don't think that's not necessarily a healthy for it, particularly since, you know, you guys you've kind of gone on the millennial thing, etc. I think that propagates the special a little bit too much. And the fact is that you won't, even if you have a need at a startup, I think enough companies have realized that a bad hire is really, really, really costly, that even if work's not getting done, you don't rush a decision like that, because you need to find the right people. And not all good jobs are good jobs, and the good jobs you want, and you got to earn those good jobs. And so I think that's important. And then the second piece is that, what do I look for in a resume? In my opinion, a sales rep makes their money in years 2 through 4 and 5. Right? Year 1 is you're putting in the effort, you're doing the things that you need to do to build your franchise. And if you keep seeing people that leave after 1 to 2 years, what it says to me is that they actually aren't that good of a rep. Now, there's always exceptions. If it's 1 time or if it's 2 times over a longer career, that's different. But, you know, I was just meeting with actually, this is great, right? So Matt Thanos is Jim Thanos, my Broad Vision mentor's son. And I just met with him last night, and he was at Scout RFP from under $1 million in ARR, and they took it through, and they just sold it to Workday. And he was the first guy on the ground that went all the way through. If you go back and look at Matt's background, he got promoted twice at Salesforce, and I think, or maybe 3 times, and then before he left, and then went to Twitter, and I think he probably got another promotion then. So this is a guy who stuck around, grounded out. And by the way, you build relationships that way. If you keep leaving after a year or 2 or under 2 years, who's really your sponsor? Who's really, like, my hope is that anybody that works for me or with me never has another cold interview, because we've done good stuff together. And regardless of how the company panned out, if they need a reference, I can speak very specifically to the things that they do well that's going to help them get hired. And you don't build that in a year or 2. You build that by going through tough times together with people. And so I just think for sales reps who leave jobs under 2 years consistently over and over again, I mean, Richard, you responded back and say, what if they've had crappy leadership? I'm like, well, 6 times, you know the story. If somebody breaks up with you and it's like the 5th person to break up with you, it's probably not them, it's probably you, right? I think that you have to look in the mirror and figure out what am I doing that's getting in my way? And believe me, there's nobody that has more self-inflicted gunshot wounds than me. And so I just think that that's a really important thing, is to get into a company and show growth and success and that kind of thing.
That's great. I appreciate a different perspective. So thank you for sharing that. One last question is, particularly you get into the treadmill, right? You've been through Mashery, you've been through, you're going through it with Troops, and what do you do to stay sane? What are the things you do to stay healthy? I know you're married and you have kids and you're putting a lot of energy there. What are the hobbies that you use to just keep yourself grounded?
The kids are now teenagers, so they take actually a lot less time because they're not really that interested in that anymore.
Richard and I are slightly looking forward to that phase.
It goes fast. I know we're running out of time, so I won't have to get too touchy-feely, but honestly, I've actually spent the last year with kind of like a life coach / therapist. So the thing that's gotten me going now is trying to, figure out myself and how to be better and how to, just be a better person, better leader. And I don't mean to be all, I hit rock bottom or anything like that. It's just like, well, what do I got to do to keep getting better? And I'll leave you on this story. Like, so 2 years ago, I turned 50, and I was going to London every month for a week. So while I was there, the Tate Modern had a Picasso exhibit. It was 1932, Picasso's 50th year. And people had written off Picasso. He's driving around in a limo. He's not hungry anymore. He's got a mistress. He's got 2 houses. He's rich. Even his closest friends and critics were like, he's kind of done. And they offered him a retrospective, which was only the second living artist to get one, a year after Matisse, who was his friendly rival. And he spent the first half of 1932, and Picasso was one of those artists who was incredibly prolific. He could do 2 or 3 paintings in a couple of days, sculptures, and he was remarkable, right? Then he came out in June, I think it was, and he did the whole thing. He set up the pieces of work, he chose them, he put them all out, and people were like, holy crap, Picasso is back. And Picasso went on to have 40 more years of prolific creation of beautiful art. And he had that at 50 years old. And I'm walking through, and I love Picasso. I really love Picasso. But none of the pieces really stood out to me. What stood out to me was that here I was 50, I'm on my 3rd startup, it's not going very well. I'm kind of like had a little brownout. And I just walked through and saw this guy who had done so much more than almost any human ever, and he still found that fire to have 40 more years of elite production. And so that kind of like was kind of like a kick in the pants for me to say, okay, I'm 50, my kids will be gone in a few years. What do I want to do for the next 40 years that's going to matter? And that kind of led me down the path of Untethered Soul, which I think is a really good book, just to kind of just figure your own stuff out, get out of your own way. Because really nobody's in your way more than you. And so Yeah, so that's it. I mean, the last year has been like, how do I get better? And it's, believe me, it's one step forward, 5 steps back.
Have you found a new hobby? Have you found something? Are you trying things? Are you
Well,
painting?
that's it. I mean, that actually mental health and, taking care of yourself takes a lot of time. It
Yeah.
actually does. And exercise, right? You put that together with exercise and you try to eat right, try to live a long life and try to be healthy. Like, I want to be able to hike and do stuff for a long period of time. So, that's the kind of thing that I do. And so, yeah, that's it.
That's great. So, well, Rock, thank you so much for being on with Surf and Sales. I've asked you before, and I'll ask you again. Are you finally ever going to break down and come with us to Costa Rica or Mexico? Our next one's going to be in Mexico in May. But are you? Every time I ask you, you're like, I don't surf. Well, now that you're on this Zen moment, right? Like, this is the perfect time for me to close you. Right? I'm listening. I'm doing my active listening. So,
do you know, the funny thing is that I have such a puritanical upbringing, right? It's like I don't take a lot of days off. And so that's really like, it's like, how can I justify that? It's like, how can I? So I'll ask you, what's give me the pitch that I can give to Dan, my CEO, that says, I need to be gone this week. Here's what I'm going to learn and bring back. Because believe me, I'd love to go. I'd love to go surf and sail, hike and sail, trek and sail,
It sounds to me like the issue is more with you than it is with.
Yeah, you got to get out of your own way.
Right. You're probably right. You're absolutely right, Scott. It's true.
I'll leave you with that.
So
that's a good one.
So here's the deal. I will pitch it out as best I can, and Scott will jump in. So, in case you couldn't tell, I'm not the major surfer. Scott and Jeff are the major surfers. But we spend anywhere from 3 to 4 hours doing surfing, right? It includes lessons. So if you've never surfed before, every day you've got a surf lesson so that you can figure it out. Usually by the end of day 1, everybody's up on the board anyway. It's not some long process to learn. But the other time we're really sitting around doing some content that's been cultivated by us, but also from attendees. So for example, Rock, you could come in and talk about something you're really passionate about in sales or leadership so that others can learn from you. And then the rest of the time is you are spending time with like-minded sales related individuals. So you're getting to have those longer, deeper conversations that you can't do at Dreamforce, right? You're breaking bread with these people. You're sharing personal stories where you do a session on how to tell a story, like storytelling. And it gets really deep, and you have these intimate relationships that are going to last forever. Much, kind of like how yours and I have occurred over the years. But it's not a bro fest. It's not a drunk fest. It's not a let's just go on the beach and smoke weed kind of thing. It's pretty much the opposite of that. If we're getting up and surfing at 7 a.m, you're not staying out till 1 o'clock at night partying, right? Like, it's not that kind of an event. And Scott, Scott's really much better at pitching the dream. So I'll let Scott explain a little bit, and then we'll jump off of here. So
I don't have to pitch the dream. Rock already said that he's working on himself, and he's working on his health and his mental health. He already said that he has a puritanical issue with taking time off, right? So it's a perfect opportunity for him to work on these kind of things. If you don't think that part of the experience is physical health, mental health, getting into a beautiful setting with like-minded individuals, you got another thing coming, right? And
well, there's no event that I'd rather go to. I can tell you that much.
Well, he's moved from Puritan to whatever is one step above that. So he's moved up the farm. So
getting there.
At any rate, great.
Scott, it was a real pleasure to meet you. I've heard your name for a decade, I think. And Richard, it's always good to catch up, man. Thank you so much
always
for
a pleasure, man.
Listening to old man stories. I
I
feel like I'm like Tony Kornheiser, old man radio. Yeah.
Talk again soon.
Take care, guys.
Bye.